Hi, my name's Mary Green, otherwise known as in these parts as Mary Martha Green. I was very fortunate to grow up here in beautiful Beaufort and have always loved the Low Country and her people and food and the stories that go along with them. I have a tea towel that says, in the South, a recipe is more valuable than gold, and it always comes with a good story. And I believe that's so true. I've spent the last 2 years compiling recipes that remind me of good food, good times, and great memories, and I wanted to share some of those with you today. The first thing I want to talk about is my Aunt Mimi's cheese biscuits. My Aunt Mimi was my mother's younger sister, and she was known all throughout Beaufort for these cheese biscuits. The recipe can be found in a lot of 1950s cookbooks. I think Mimi just made so many of them over the next 60 years that she kind of perfected the recipe. It's just cheese, margarine, flour, Rice Krispies, and red pepper, but she would make them and get them so they would just melt in your mouth. Many years ago, I have spent most of my adult life in lobbying and government relations in Columbia. And many years ago, I was on a lobbying trip to DC when my mother and Aunt Mimi had to come to Columbia for a portrait dedication and a luncheon at the State House. Since I was not there, I asked my best friend Jane, would she bring my goddaughter Wendy by to visit with them after they got off of work and got through with school. So Wendy's preschool was only about 5 blocks from my house, and all the way from preschool to my house, Jane told Wendy she was not to ask her any cheese biscuits. If Miss Mimi offered her some, she could have some, but she was not to ask. So Jane and Wendy get to the house, and my mother and Aunt Mimi and Jane are chatting, visiting, no mention of cheese biscuits or a tea party. So Wendy sidled up to the chair Aunt Mimi was sitting in, and she looked at Aunt Mimi with her big blue eyes, and she said just as pitifully as she could muster, "We don't have any cheese biscuits at our house." Well, Aunt Mimi realized they had not had a tea party, so she jumped up. They went in the kitchen, pulled out all the proper accoutrements of a tea party, and had a great time that afternoon. From that time on until Mimi died, we would use the pitiful, "We don't have any cheese biscuits at our house," to get cheese biscuits out of Aunt Mimi, although she was always very gracious and always shared. And that beautiful little 4-year-old blue-eyed girl is now 28 years old, and she got married last fall, and you better believe when she got married, there were plenty of cheese biscuits all over that house for her reception. For Aunt Mimi's 80th birthday, she wanted to go to Alaska. And one of the places she wanted to go on the way was to go back to Victoria, Canada, and go back to the Empress Hotel and have tea and spend the night there. She and my mother had been there many years before that. It was always kind of an inside our family joke that Aunt Mimi looked like Queen Elizabeth, and from a very young age, pictures of her looked like the pictures of Queen Elizabeth at the same age, and she was just a little bit older than Queen Elizabeth. Well, the first night we were in Victoria. Victoria has an inner harbor and an upper harbor, and the inner harbor just means it's down closer to the water. And we were walking along the inner harbor to go to dinner, and this street performer in full Elizabethan garb comes up and bows down in front of Mimi like Sir Walter Raleigh and says, "My queen, my queen." Well, Mimi just clutched her purse closer, thinking we were going to be mugged or something. And I looked at her and I said, "He thinks you look like Queen Elizabeth." Well, she just grabbed her purse and off we went. So the next day we were in one of the heraldry shops that, sells the china that has the pictures of the royal family on it, and an older lady was working in there, and she commented to Mimi that perhaps Mimi looked like Queen Elizabeth, and Mimi didn't think that was funny either. So several years after that, Mother and Mimi were right down here at the post office, and this lady that was working behind the counter looked at Mimi and in her best low country accent said, "You kind of favor the queen." So at that point, Aunt Mimi had to admit that perhaps she did favor Queen Elizabeth. Aunt Mimi always loved these country ham scones, and while they didn't have country ham scones at the Empress Hotel, they did have scones, and Aunt Mimi always said that they reminded her of being at the Empress Hotel. I'm going to serve Bonnie. In these days of social distancing, I'm going to serve Bonnie a country ham scone in the easiest way we know how, using our napkin and sliding in with these lovely servers, not my grandmother's silver servers, but the lovely servers from your basic Dollar Tree. The next thing I want to talk about is this cake. I call this the mama cake. It's a compilation of several mamas that I love's recipes. The icing is my mother's recipe. It's a divinity icing, a boiled icing that you know here in the Low Country can be hard to make sometimes with all our humidity. I wished I had paid more attention to my mama when she was making it when I was growing up, because I've had to experiment with it and figure it out for myself. The layers are lemon pound cake layers. They are the recipe of Miss Kitty Wyndham, who is the mother of Cindy Duryea, who lives here in Beaufort. When Cindy got married in 1974, they had a dessert shower for her, where you brought a dessert and then you brought the pan or whatever utensil you needed to make that dessert with. So a Mama T in Aiken, a Mrs. Talbert, gave Cindy this recipe and told her that if she learned how to make that dessert, she would never have to learn to make another thing. And boy, was she right. This has been everybody's favorite pound cake recipe all these years. So it's divinity icing, lemon pound cake layers, but then in between it, it has lemon filling. And the lemon filling is the recipe of the mother of Senator J. Vern Smith of Greer. Senator Smith was one of the longest serving senators in the South Carolina State Senate. Senator Smith was known for having all kind of folksy sayings like, "There's no education in the second kick of a mule." And when lobbyists would come in and bring their clients and bring big old thick notebooks in to give to Senator Smith, he'd rear back in his chair and say, "Now, I'm not much for notebooks. If you can't explain it in 2 sentences, just forget it." Senator Smith was also known for his story about the Zuzu flies, and I want to tell you that story today. Senator Smith's father died when he was a little boy, but his mama continued to run the peach farm. And his mama had a man that worked for him named Quillen Llewellyn. And Quillen drove one of the peach trucks that was only supposed to be driven on the farm on the highway one day to go to the store for his wife. And the highway patrolman stopped him. And while the highway patrolman was standing there by Quillen's peach truck, the flies started buzzing around because there were all these peaches over here on the truck. And you know how our sand gnats can kind of get on us and we batten them away like that? Well, the highway patrolman was batting them away. And Quillen looked at him and he said, "Them Zuzu flies." And the highway patrolman said, "Well, how do you know what kind of flies they are?" And Quillen said, "Because those are the kind of flies that swarm around the south end of a northbound mule when I'm plowing." Well, the highway patrolman didn't take real kindly to that, and he asked Quillen if he was referring to him as a mule's ass. Well, Quillen said no, so he wasn't referring to him as a mule's ass, but it was awful hard to fool a Zuzu fly. So J. Vern would tell that story on the Senate floor, and he would make it expound or contract by however long he needed to hold the floor for a filibuster. And the story would always conclude that if you weren't on the same side as J. Vern and doing exactly what J. Vern thought ought to be done in the Senate, you just might be something that would attract a Zuzu fly. I appreciate y'all letting me spend some time with you today. I'm gonna cut this cake so y'all can see what it looks like. I hope while you're having to spend time at home these days that you'll take your family recipes out and make sure that they are all written down, and we have someone coming in for a scoop, that they're all written down, and that if there are any stories that go with them, that, ooh, look at that. See the layers and the lemon filling and the divinity icing and the coconut on top, and see we're maintaining our social distancing, but here's the cake, here's what it looks like, all cut. I hope y'all will spend this time with your families and create some good food, some good times, and some great memories. Thanks for letting me spend some time with you today.